We have these scripture verses, we have this doctrine, there is this mysterious role of the Jews between the first and second coming. We know at the very least that they'll be around at the time of the second coming. We know this from that citation from Luke 23. And we know that there's going to be a conversion of the Jews to shortly precede the second coming. And so we have scripture and we have a little bit of church doctrine to fill in the picture of what's the role of Jews and Judaism in salvation between the first and the second coming. And we have something else too, which I'll argue sheds light on this, which is history itself. We have the benefit of the last 2,000 years of history to help shed light on what the role of the Jews is in this period between the first and the second coming and leading up to the second coming. So let me talk about that a little bit. We have two mysteries, I will argue, in this last 2,000 years of the history of the Jews. The first mystery is their continued existence at all. Okay? If you read the pages of the Old Testament, it's full of the accounts of the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Edomites. You know, all tribes much more powerful and numerous than the Jews were. And yet, you don't read about them in the pages of the New York Times every day, right? I mean, there's a mystery to the fact, and I will argue there's no other example of a people which for 2,000 years, without a homeland, you know, without any kind of external source of ethnic adhesion, has maintained their identity. I mean, there are examples of people who have held their identity for 300 or 400 years, but I don't know of any where they've held their identity essentially in exile and scattered throughout the world for 2,000 years, much less then return to being both an ethnic and a geographic group. So we have the mystery of the persistence of the Jews. We have a mystery also of essentially anti-Semitism, of the continued animosity directed to the Jews for 2,000 years. Again, I will argue that, every ethnic group has been hated at some time in history by some other group, but there are not a whole lot who have been hated at every point in history by every group that they happen to find themselves in. And of course, the culmination, the epitome of this is the Holocaust, which is in our own day in some sense. And, I'll argue that the Holocaust itself sheds tremendous light on the mystery of the Jews and the mystery of the Jews in connection to the second coming. So let me go there now. By the way, I'm talking fast for two reasons. One is because this is a 350-page book and I'm trying to get through it in 40 minutes. And the other reason is because I'm a New York Jew. But anyway, everything that I'm talking about is obviously, I'm just doing like this very quick flyby of some of the major, themes in the book. So if you're interested, that's the kind of place that everything is fleshed out and also supported to a much greater extent. Especially when I get into the history. I can't have footnotes in this talk, but the book is based almost entirely on primary sources. And there's something like 400 footnotes in there. It's all heavily documented, especially the more controversial issues, which I'll be getting to when I talk about the Holocaust. So let me get into this talk about the Holocaust. There are a number of reasons I wanted to talk about the Holocaust. One is because, as I mentioned a little bit this morning, there's this horrible, it's being used as a bludgeon with which to beat Catholics over the head, right? To beat the Catholic Church over the head. Weren't you evil? You didn't do anything to stop the Holocaust. This horrible calumny about Pius XII, when in fact, the former, I think it was a foreign minister of Israel, Pinchas Lapide, wrote a book about it and estimated that Pius XII was personally responsible for saving between 700,000 and 800,000 Jews from extermination during the Holocaust. But nonetheless, there is this calumny that somehow the Catholic Church was, directly or indirectly responsible. And so that's one reason I want to talk about it. But another reason I want to talk about it is because despite this calumny that suggests that the Holocaust was somehow an expression of a Christian sentiment, nothing could be further from the truth. As soon as you look at the spiritual streams that flowed into the Holocaust, it's very painfully obvious that they were all flowed directly from hell, and that the Holocaust was a direct expression of the diabolical will. So let me talk about three streams that flowed directly into the Holocaust. Those three streams were eugenics, occultism, and sexual depravity. And again, I'm talking about those three streams in part because we see their reemergence today, and which we also had a beautiful talk this morning that introduced at least that to some extent. So let me talk about those three streams. The first one I think I'm going to mention is eugenics, okay? Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany January 30th, 1933. Within 4 months, he has set up the Expert Committee on Questions of Population and Racial Policy, which a month later passed a law for the compulsory sterilization of carriers of hereditary diseases, including feeble-mindedness, alcoholism, and epilepsy, under which about 400,000 people were forcibly sterilized. Shortly thereafter, they instituted a program to euthanize disabled children by drugs or the cessation of feeding, under which program about 275,000 people were essentially killed at birth. In fact, every doctor and midwife had a form to fill out on the birth of a child with like 2 boxes to check whether or not the child should be allowed to live. Now, why am I talking about this? Because there was a continual flowing back and forth between Hitler's eugenics experts and Margaret Sanger's birth control lead, okay? I mentioned the German Eugenics Institute, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Genealogy in Munich, which was the main institute for eugenics in Germany, was headed by Dr. Ernst Ruden, who was a frequent contributor to Margaret Sanger's birth control review. And another Margaret Sanger Birth Control League board member was named Lothrop Stoddard, who in 1920 had written a book called The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. And this book was used as the foundational work in the German school system for eugenics, to such an extent that Goebbels complained to Hitler how inappropriate it was that the fundamental work used for eugenics in the German school system should come from a foreigner, should come from an American. And as I said, he was a board member of Margaret Sanger's Birth Control League. And we don't see, how can I put this? All of these 3 streams, and I'll talk about the other 2 now, I mean, it's really kind of spooky how we see echoes of them getting, emerging above the surface more today. The other stream I want to talk about is occultism. Hitler's first springboard to public life was a occult society called the Thule Society, T-H-U-L-E, in Munich. Now, Thule is the Germanic version of the Atlantis myth. Thule was this mythical continent in the Atlantic where the people had these superpowers. They could, travel through air with just their will and, things like that, telepathy and so forth. And it was populated by the super race. The continent sank under the waves of the Atlantic. Before it sank, this super race fled to the European continent and from there to Asia, where they interbred with inferior races and through this interbreeding lost their superpowers. But if the purity of their bloodlines could be reestablished through eugenics, through selective breeding, they would regain their superpowers. And that was the origin of the Nazi Superman policy and Superman myth. Hitler was, it's absolutely overt that he was a member of the society. In fact, the leader of the society, when he was a member, was an occultist named Dietrich Eckart, who publicly boasted that he was the one who had initiated Hitler. Now, what's initiation? From the point of view of the occultists, initiation is opening their centers of higher vision so that they can see into the spiritual world and communicate with the powers, which is in some perverse sense true, but what it truly is the introduction of demonic entities into the person, which then enable the person to have some illegitimate commerce with the spiritual world, with the fallen spiritual world, right, with the demonic world. Here's the direct quote from Dietrich Eckart, the leader of the Thule Society. Quote, "I have initiated him," meaning Hitler, "into the secret doctrine, opened his centers of vision, and given him the means to communicate with the powers." Okay. Now, should anyone doubt this, if you find a copy of Mein Kampf that isn't abridged, the final paragraph of Mein Kampf is a dedication of the work by Hitler to Dietrich Eckart. And no less of an authority than the chief exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriele Amorth, was quoted as saying, quote, "Without a doubt, Hitler was personally consecrated to Satan." Now, I would love to give an hour-and-a-half talk alone on the occultism behind the Third Reich, but I can't do that now. But I don't want to just point people to the book, but it's really creepy how much overlap there is still now today between the New Age and